Request of Henry Benedict to address council regarding COVID restrictions and lockdown.
Hi, Henry.
Hello. Hi. So, yeah, my name is Henry Benedict, and I just want to start out by saying thank you all for hearing me speak today. I used to work as a fundraiser here in Portland for about a year and a half prior to the pandemic, and I would engage with the public who are on all sides of the political spectrum. And so I strongly believe that real social change only happens when people speak to each other in person. And that's why I want to talk to you about how the COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions were implemented. So I took this data directly from the CDC's website, and it states that social isolation significantly increases a person's risk of premature death from all causes, a risk that may rival those of smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. Poor social relationships characterized by social isolation or loneliness was associated with a 29% increased risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke. Loneliness was also associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, high blood pressure, a weakened immune system, and even Alzheimer's disease. And during the start of the pandemic, I made 4 trips between Portland and Texas to visit family. And I ended up moving to Austin at the end of 2020, just honestly because to me, living here was a little overwhelming. There was a loneliness epidemic before the pandemic, and I feel that the lockdowns exacerbated the existing mental health crisis in the country. And the solution, which increased our dependency on social media, was negatively affecting the youth and causing excessive stress to those with poor support systems. So the restrictions for students had devastating impacts on their learning and social psychological development. Schools faced severe staff shortages and high absenteeism while struggling with mental health challenges, violence, and lost instruction time. Coin6 News shows that Oregon's youth was hit hard during COVID, with the number of children experiencing anxiety or depression climbing to 40% from 2016 to 2020. And indoor mask requirements were finally lifted on March 11th of this year in Oregon, I believe. And because children and adolescents tend to have milder symptoms compared to adults, I believe those requirements could have, in my opinion, ended much sooner. Because the restrictions, and I'm almost done here, but because of the restrictions, there were also many limitations on the services that normally would have provided resources to the homeless. I've spoken
Why don't
to...
you go ahead and finish?
Okay, thank you. I've spoken to a considerable number of homeless people, and many feel the pandemic made it more difficult for them to survive. There was also a business alongside Powell that I would pass by, and I found it difficult, or it found it difficult to remain open because all the graffiti and homeless tents surrounding the property, they couldn't keep their business open. So weeks and months went by, and the owners couldn't do anything about it, so eventually it was forced to close down for good. The recent data suggests that low-income families, when compared to their higher-income counterparts, have been affected much more by spiking unemployment and job insecurity. So, in conclusion, personally, I don't think Portland could handle another lockdown, but rather should something like COVID happen again, I would recommend just responding proportionally with common sense and respect for your fellow citizens' rights. I looked up, and I hope I'm not coming across as patronizing here, because I appreciate the role that you guys all have here. I looked up the definition of liberal on Google, and it means relating to a personal or social philosophy that promotes individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise. By that definition, I felt Texas held more true to traditional liberal values than Oregon during the pandemic. I still love Portland, and I think it'll eventually come back around. We're seeing things open up again, people are out and about. Seems like the economy is sort of kicking back up. But, we're all individuals with the capacity to make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I don't think anybody is. But what's important is whether or not we learn from them. So, thank you.
Henry, thank you. Henry, thank you for your testimony this morning. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the last almost 3 years. I mean, it was March 2020 when the shutdown happened. And just, personally, I remember all of the discussions that led up to that decision. And I remember the initial shutdown was expected to last 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah.
2 weeks. I mean, that's where the science was. That's where the understanding was of pandemics and the spread of pandemics and what it would take to stop a pandemic. And here we are almost 3 years later, and there's no question about it, that not just the shutdown, but everything else associated with it, the economic, the social consequences, it's had a profound impact. We can't deny it. It's easy now to look in retrospect and say that jurisdiction A did this and jurisdiction B did that, and I hope we do learn from it, but I would also like to remind people what information we were dealing with at the time that those decisions were made.
Yeah, I totally hear you.
And so what I don't want to have happen is have it become a political football. This is, we have to have a clear-eyed, objective analysis of what worked and what didn't work. And you have a list of things that you think don't work. I have a completely different and perhaps even longer list of things that I think didn't work. But we have to have a clear-eyed, objective analysis of this through the lens of what does it take to deal with the consequences of a pandemic. So I do appreciate your being here. It's provocative. I know there's people all over the country, indeed all over the world, evaluating what the responses were and whether they were, in retrospect, the right responses or the wrong responses.
Well, I appreciate that. Can I just state one more thing?
Sure.
If that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when COVID first happened, I had just come back from a trip in North Carolina, so it was like something that just happened. It was, the rug was just pulled out from everybody. And, when the restrictions were first announced, my own opinion was that I thought that it was a little impulsive, but I just, I understood that, 2 weeks to flatten the curve was the initial response, and then 2 weeks became 2 months, 2 months became 2 years, and, the rest. And it's just, I guess, just from my perspective, and, I can't speak for you guys because you guys are, in a different position than I am, but, just fundraising and just being able to talk to many people in the city, I felt that, I got to understand a lot of the issues going on, but I noticed that the restrictions had a much more profound impact on society as a whole psychologically. And I think that all
Agreed.
I'm trying to say today is that I think in the future, if we're presented with a similar situation, that, we take into account how it affects the different demographics of people rather than just
Agreed.
having a one-size-fits-all solution.
But absolutely. We have far more information today than we did 3 years ago. Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
It's good to see you in person.